So today we're going to talk about the Earth Regeneration Fund, what the idea is, how it works, how it may be a bit of an unconventional way of thinking about a fund because it's mostly not about money, even though it is a way of organizing money. And we hope that it does move a lot of money. Um, but also before that, to just say that I came down with a fever yesterday in the afternoon and I've been sick all night and I've been in bed all morning. And we did blood tests this morning to see if maybe I have dengue fever again, and we'll know soon. And so just to keep things interesting, I wanted to let you know that I'm feeling a little under the weather and maybe feeling under the weather for the next 2 to 3 weeks. If it is if it is that recurring thing again, we'll find out. But welcome to the craziness of living in the middle of the collapsing world where there's so much disruption. Not a single day goes by without something being disrupted for someone. It's just typical now. And I want to name, as we get started today, that part of what we're going to talk about today comes out of some work that I was involved in for about 10 years through an organization called The Rules. And the idea of The Rules was to change the rules of the global system to get to the root causes of poverty, inequality, and our ecological crisis. And that meant that we did lots of really powerful campaigns to help people understand how poverty is created, how wealth inequality works, why there's so much of it and why it gets bigger, and why the whole system is so rigged. And so it's an important part of our conversation that hasn't come up a lot in the design school so far. But I'm just going to show one slide today where I'm going to give some statistics that I think will shock you. And they're actually outdated statistics because the statistics would be worse today than they are in what I'm going to show you. But basically, the point is that the reason we can't have nice things and the reason that humanity is on the verge of driving itself to extinction is largely because we have a globalized economic system and political system that is designed for extreme wealth hoarding by a tiny elite to make everyone else on Earth completely disempowered to turn them into economic slaves. And I think we can all relate to this, where you have to work a shitty job that you hate to be able to pay rent and buy food to basically not die. And this is how our globalized system is set up. And this is important because what we're going to be talking about today is how we could relate differently to money. That relates to a different kind of economic system that needs to be created. And so while the focus is on how does money flow into bioregions and how does learning occur within and between bioregions and how this gives us a different way of thinking about the story of money, it's really important that we're actively attacking the core logic of that other narrative. That we actually need to show how pathological it is, how false it is, and how intentionally it's designed to create exactly the outcomes that it's created. One of the things I like to say is the economy isn't broken, it's fixed. It's fixed to do exactly what it does. And so this is really important because when we talk about mobilizing resources to support the restoration of watersheds, the connectivity of different ecosystems to restore biodiversity, soil health, and then all the things related to social well-being, trust, social connectivity, the ability to manage our traumas and heal from them, our ability to be in healthy relationships to each other, that basically the core logic of our globalized financial system is designed to be sure none of that healing occurs. And it actually continually harms us to keep us in a reactionary mode so that we can't come together and build the alternative system. Which means at the core of what we're going to talk about today, even though I'm not going to spend much time talking about it, but I want to name it before I start the presentation, is we're talking about reclaiming our sovereignty. That we actually are sovereign as human beings to create whatever kind of economic system we want. And we don't have to live within the one that was given to us. And so what I'm going to show you today with the Earth Regeneration Fund is a way of thinking about how we could build economies differently, and that we don't have to ask anyone permission, that no one's looking anyway, because we are not, quote, important within the signals of the mainstream system. And so we can go under the radar and make a lot of this stuff happen, and no one will even notice for a long time, because they're all too busy looking at what Elon Musk says, or people who are just really distorted signals. They're not looking at like who builds a healthy permaculture garden or who's good at raising children. They're not looking at the things that build a real economy. And so, so I just want to start with that context setting because when we talk about this fund, you're either going to look at it and go, this is a great idea, or you're going to look at it and go, this is completely unrealistic. It's not going to happen. And what I want us to say is this kind of thing will only happen if we decide to take the power and control on ourselves and build it. And that what I'm going to show you is a type of story that we can all put ourselves into. And that we don't have to compete around it's my project or your project and how do they relate to the story. It's how do we build a synergistic and collaborative story that brings us up to the planetary scale, which is urgently needed. And so, so with that said, I would like to start sharing my screen and have this presentation introducing the Earth Regeneration Fund. And so first, I just want to name these words. I do this sometimes. I pick a title on purpose. The Earth Regeneration Fund. Notice how it's not a climate relief fund. It's not a disaster response fund. It's not a carbon sequestration fund. It's not a recycling fund. It's a holistic, visionary, integrative approach to well-being for the planet as a whole. It's not dealing with the climate crisis. It's not dealing with biodiversity. It's not dealing with pollution in the world ocean. All of those are part of what it deals with. But what it ultimately needs to deal with is the healthy cycling of living patterns throughout the entire dynamic Earth. And the idea of a fund, as I've talked about in some of the regenerative finance labs that we've had in the past, is that for me, a fund is the collection and relationships among all sources of value within any context, which is to say a fund is not about money. Money can be a source of value that can flow, but knowledge is value that can flow. Tools are value that can flow. Infrastructure is value that can flow. Basically, it's that whole multi-capital way of thinking that there are many kinds of value. They're all in different kinds of relationship to each other, and they can all flow together in service to the regeneration of the Earth. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is how to create the Earth Regeneration Fund, which we've already began. And so I want to start by asking a question that I don't think this question gets asked very much. Why is it that of all the governments, investors, and philanthropists in the world, that none of them are funding the regeneration of the Earth? Have you noticed that? There are a lot of people funding climate. There are a lot of people funding to try to address violence against women. There are a lot of people funding the malnutrition of children to try to help them be healthier. But where is the story about all of that money being invested in regenerating the Earth? Why is it that our discourse does not go there? Why is it that we have all this talk about many different things that are being invested in, but there's not a holistic, unifying approach for the planet? That's the question I have. And the answer to that question has many parts, but one of the parts is that our system is rigged. It's totally rigged. So when you design a globalized system for the hoarding of wealth by a financial elite, you get things like this statistic. This is a statistic from 2012, where they found that 300 individuals, by the way, almost all of them were white men, 300 individuals had the same aggregate private wealth as 3 billion people. So that was like 2012. In 2019, they looked at it again as like, oh, wait, now it's 26 people have the same aggregate wealth as 3.8 billion. So, and these numbers got a lot worse after COVID. And so, between 2019 and today, it's probably that there are something like 10 people who have the aggregate wealth of 4.1 billion or something like that. This is something, this aggregating of wealth upward to a tiny group of people while depriving and creating scarcity for everyone else on Earth, is how the system is designed. And when I was part of the team at the Rules and we were gathering these kinds of economic statistics, we came upon this one. So this is a statistic that showed, why is it that so much aid money from places like the UK or the US, if aid money goes to impoverished countries, why don't they get less impoverished? And when you add up the amount of money that's given in aid and the amount of money that's extracted through unfair trade agreements, through tax havens, and through various other mechanisms, you would find that about $2 trillion per year was moving from the so-called poor countries of the world to the so-called rich countries of the world. So countries like the United States and Canada and the countries of Western Europe, countries like Germany and France and the UK, are accumulating wealth by extracting it and stealing it from the rest of the world. So this is how our globalized system is built today, is that those who have the power to use military force and the manipulation of economic stories through policymaking, that they're able to create a directional flow that takes all of the money in the world and gives it to a tiny, tiny number of people. So it's no wonder we can't fund the regeneration of the earth. All the money's going somewhere else, and it's going somewhere else intentionally. And so when we ask, well, where does the money go to that at least tries to address these kinds of issues? And you look at things like what happened last week with Hurricane Helen. This is pictures of the flooding in Asheville, North Carolina. And you see that every time there's a disaster, we send billions of dollars to react to the disaster. It's gonna be billions of dollars sent to Asheville, North Carolina. After Hurricane Milton, there might be billions of dollars going to Florida. But this is to rebuild the old infrastructure, not to invest in the new. And so as we have more disasters, what happens is we end up in this reaction trap where more and more of our money is going to just help people recover from the harms that were caused because we never invested in the pathway that would have avoided those harms in the first place. And so a lot of our philanthropic money and public sector investment money goes to reacting to disasters that we could have avoided had we invested differently 10, 20, or 30 years earlier. Another thing that happens is that rich people are really good at getting more money. So there's this whole realm of impact investing. Impacting investing is where rich people say, well, I'm a multimillionaire and you guys are worried about climate, so I'll give you money as long as I get at least a 3% financial return, which means as long as I get my money plus more money, I'll give some money. So the people who are the beneficiaries of stealing and hoarding of wealth through an unfair and extractive system basically say, I'll help you a little as long as it helps me become even richer. And that's what's called impact investing. And it's a Ponzi scheme. It's bullshit. And so this is rich people deciding where money goes to be sure they stay rich. As the Amazon rainforest collapses, as the North Atlantic deep sea formation shuts down, and as the biodiversity of the earth is going away, these rich people are doing this. And then there's siloed thinking. How many of you have ever applied for funding from a government agency or from a foundation where they require you to be pigeonholed into a non-systemic and completely reductionistic and honestly stupid and absurd way of thinking, with heavy amounts of reporting so that half the money you receive is spent being sure you show them that you met their requirements? Huge amounts of money are wasted in this way by foundations, which, by the way, foundations are rich people who set up tax havens. They place their money in a foundation, so it's tax exempt. So they can decide how the money is spent by defining what kinds of programs. And then you have to beg for funding within those program categories through that siloed thinking. And you can see more and more why we're not able to fund the regeneration of the earth. And then there's technocratic market tools like carbon credits, and we could name a whole bunch of them here. But basically, people who think technology is the solution, and what we need is to build better market tools. Notice they don't say we should change the core logic of the market. They say we should keep the core logic of the market the same, but develop fancy new tools. And if we invest in those tools, somehow we'll fix the problems that the logic of the market created. And so these are some of the ways that funding fails to go to Earth regeneration at the scale of trillions of dollars per year. So the story of Earth regeneration remains hidden. You don't even see it. You see, send aid to Asheville, North Carolina, or you see, oh, if I have a clever enough way to help rich people make more money, they'll give me some money. Or if I beg a foundation, I'm one of 500 applicants, maybe they'll give me money to do some piecemeal, ridiculous thing that won't actually do anything transformative. And all the while, the story of regenerating the earth remains hidden from the logic of that discourse. And so this is where the way that we understand the story is really important. Because when we ask, Why is it that so much money is spent on environmental issues or social well-being, and yet things get worse one year to the next? It's because it's the core logic of our globalized system. By the way, this is what Occupy Wall Street was protesting against. This is what Arab Spring was rising up against. We've already had multiple times where hundreds of millions of people have risen in unison to try to stop the system, but they never created its replacement. We need to create the replacement for that system. And the Earth Regeneration Fund is only one teeny tiny piece of replacing that system. But I think you'll see why it's so important with what's going on in the world today. So I want to go back even before the design school was started. So, the Design School for Regenerating Earth opened in March of 2023. But at the beginning of January in 2020, I launched Earth Regenerators as a study group for this book, for my book, The Design Pathway for Regenerating Earth. And if you were to read the last chapter of my book, you'd see this, that what we need to do is say a planet-wide network of learning ecosystems is needed that can hold the complexity of birthing these regenerative bioregions during and after the rest of the collapse that we were all born into. So that's in the final chapter of my book that was written in 2020. It was something we talked about during the time of Earth Regenerators, and it's something that underlies everything we're doing in the design school. So we had a learning journey earlier this year on birthing of bioregional learning centers so that we could have a network of learning centers, a network of learning ecosystems all over the world, each of them working on regenerating its own bioregion. And during that learning journey, we revealed that to create a bioregional learning center, you also have to create funding and governance systems to fund it and to make decisions and to allocate resources within the bioregion, and that you have to build a knowledge commons for your bioregion so you have holistic and collective understanding. And without those things, you cannot create a bioregional learning center because those are foundational elements of creating one. And so this emphasis on funding and governance is what we're focusing on more today. This is how I started writing about the Earth Regeneration Fund as we were setting it up this year. So we're asking how financing flows into the regeneration of bioregions. And I just want to read this text. One of the great challenges for Earth regeneration, as we've just discussed, is how financial resources flow. Basically, they flow from poor people all over the world to rich people, and then those rich people decide how the money is spent to be sure the rigged system is never changed. That's how financial flow works now. So the great challenge for us is how financial resources flow in a different way. They flow into, across, and between bioregions around the world. So the Earth Regeneration Fund is a living laboratory for a network of bioregions that each is creating its own funding ecosystem. So this effort is coordinated through the Design School for Regenerating Earth, although we're collaborating with lots of other groups, where learning supports are in place to scaffold the exchanges like this session we're in right now, to scaffold the exchanges among local landscape leaders in different geographic regions around the world. So 2 weeks ago, we gathered representatives from 5 bioregions. You'll notice this graphic has 6. That's because Barichara and the Northern Andes are there because we're creating 2 different funding ecosystems, but they're deeply interwoven. But we had representatives from the Northern Andes with us. And so we actually have representatives from these different regions. And we all gathered in the Greater Takaranto bioregion in the Toronto area. And what we wanted to do is create the relational field between representatives of these bioregions so that we could support learning and mutual aid between our different efforts. And we also kicked off a year-long process that would enable us to support different kinds of in-person immersions in the different bioregions that are involved throughout the next year. So the idea is that we're creating the Earth Regeneration Fund by having people in Cascadia, people in the High Plains and the Ogallala Aquifer of the Great Plains of North America, people in the Greater Takaranto, people in the forests of the Northeast, and people in the Northern Andes coming together to learn how to build their own funding ecosystems and support each other through patterns of mutual aid between their efforts. And we're doing this throughout the next year to create the pattern of relationships that can work with all of the other bioregions that need to do similar things. And so we gathered at a farm called Heartwood Farm for our first day. And here's a picture of the people who gathered. And on this day, what we did was we did an opening circle where we asked each person to come and share a little bit of their own story and why it was that they had arrived to this circle, with the understanding that nothing ever happens in a vacuum. And if human beings are going to create something new, it was always specific people at a specific time in a specific place. So these are the specific people who came together to birth the Earth Regeneration Fund, which means we needed to start by asking, what was the story that brought you here? And what is your intention during your time here? So we could start to see the shared intentions that were bringing us together to create this ecosystem of funding ecosystems, this way that financial flow could move across the planet in a different way. We intentionally kept the group small so that we could have intimate relationships, intimate conversations, and then it wouldn't be a big and impersonal gathering. We wanted the people who came to be friends with each other and to be friends for life afterwards. And then we spent our second day, the beginning of a 2-day period, at a place called the Cedars, which is where the Legacy Project is based. That's the work of Brian Pupa and Susan Bosak, who are highly visible in our work here in the design school. And at that gathering for 2 days, we did several things. First, we made time to get to know each other more, to enjoy each other's company, as you can see in this picture. But then also, we spent almost the entire first day asking each of the representatives of their bioregions to share what's going on in your bioregion. How are you approaching things? Where are you at now? What are you envisioning doing in the future? And so here in the top middle, you can see Will Masters talking about his work in the Ogallala Aquifer and how they're working to restore the drylands of the High Plains. In this upper right picture, you can see Bill Bowie with as holding the microphone. The reason he has a microphone is we had someone joining us, Natalia Ortiz from Barichara, was joining us from Zoom. That was so that she could hear everyone well. And she's there with Kitu and Chez, and they're from the Forest of the Northeast. And that's Sydney Griffith there in the bottom from Kinship Earth, a group that does flow funding. And then in the bottom center, you see Brian Pupa from the Greater Takaranto. The bottom right, you see Brandon Letzinger from Cascadia. The idea is we took turns telling our stories about what was happening in our bioregions. And people were basically blown away by the quality, the depth, the sophistication, the richness, the differences, and how all of us are approaching bioregional regeneration. So we basically spent an entire day grounding into the reality of what we're doing, so we could see how what we're doing could create supports for us to build exchanges with each other. And then on the third day, which is the second day of this intense workshop period, we talked about what is the story that we're living into? What is the Earth Regeneration Fund? How are each of our bioregions a part of it? How are groups like Tyler Wakefield here on the right, who's part of the group, the BioFi Project, how are these other groups that don't specifically represent a bioregion, but are trying to bring financial flows to bioregions? How do we work together? What is the story that brings us into harmony with each other? And how can we start to coordinate our schedules and create alignment around telling stories together and mobilizing resources into and between our bioregions? And then we sort of topped it all off on the last day of the gathering, where we had the Greater Takaranto bioregion, where Brian and Susan organized a regenerative finance summit to gather different people and different organizations throughout the Greater Toronto area who are part of a portfolio of projects for the bioregional funding ecosystem of their bioregion. And so they had people come and talk who represented philanthropic organizations. They had youth who are doing basically eco-leader activism. They had people from regenerative farms, from the conservation authorities, people who work on large-scale mapping of landscape systems. And we all came together to explore what will it mean for us to build a bioregional funding ecosystem in the Greater Takaranto bioregion. And we had the members of our group, meaning those who came from the design school, to mix and mingle with all of the people in the GTB and help them learn. Like here in the center top, you can see Brandon's chatting away with some people in the Toronto area talking about what's happening in Cascadia so that they can have learning exchanges between their bioregions. And this was the big kickoff event for the Greater Takaranto Bioregional Funding Ecosystem. So not only did we gather to birth the Earth Regeneration Fund and have a learning exchange between 5 bioregions, but we brought that learning directly into the practice of stimulating and catalyzing one of the bioregions involved. So what is this Earth Regeneration Fund? If I told you already it's not just money, then what is it? I think there's a really simple way to understand it. The Earth Regeneration Fund at its core is just 2 things. It's a web of relationships, like the relationships between the representatives of the 5 bioregions, people who come into relationship with each other and who come into shared context of places so that they can exchange value with each other, which includes money, but it includes other things as well. But the other thing that it is a powerful story. The Earth Regeneration Fund is a network of bioregional funding ecosystems. It's a story about how we mobilize flow through the web of relationships so that we can regenerate bioregions all over the planet. And that story is big, visionary, and inclusive. A lot of people can be part of that story. A lot of people can live out that story. And even if they're competing with others at a lower level, they can collaborate together to elevate this story. And then the Earth Regeneration Fund is the value flows among these web of relationships and the story itself. And so when you start to add the bioregions involved, just the ones who are present at that gathering, you start to see more about how it works. So one of the things that happened was Will Masters talked about his work on the Ogallala Aquifer and the Panhandle of Texas, the image you can see in the upper left. How he mostly feels isolated and alone, how the culture is not really ready, how he has to use completely different language to talk to conservative ranchers in Texas. Whereas if you look at this image over in the upper right, the forests of the eastern part of North America and the forests of the Northeast, if you go to a place like Connecticut or Massachusetts or Maine or Vermont or New Hampshire or upstate New York, you find a lot of environmentally minded people. You find very supportive environmental policies, and you find there's a lot of infrastructure for environmental actions, which means they're very different from each other. And the same when you look in the lower right, when you look at the Northern Andes, in the Northern Andes, there are hundreds of indigenous cultures with their traditional knowledge in place, still on their ancestral lands, plant medicine, wisdom traditions, all kinds of things, as well as incredible biodiversity. And it's a tropical environment, so the way that you live in harmony with nature there is very different from the way you would live in some place like Toronto. And we start to see that we immediately have things to offer each other and to learn from each other. And that the Earth Regeneration Fund is this way of coming together and sharing to help us all be better than we could be on our own. And so it's support networks, it's knowledge exchange, it's financial exchange, it's learning exchange. All of these are part of the Earth Regeneration Fund. And so we also talked about some of the specifics, like how does funding flow into a bioregion? And we had Sydney Griffith with us from the Kinship Earth Flow Fund. And I've been working with Sydney to develop a strategy for Kinship Earth to raise funding to be able to bring money into bioregions. And so this is one of the slides from a slide deck she's putting together, where basically Kinship Earth wants to help any bioregion. So all of you who are creating a bioregional organizing pattern for your work here in the design school can go to Sydney and say, hey, how could Kinship Earth help us set up a bioregional flow fund for our geographic region? Because the idea of a flow fund is that you take money and you give it to leaders in your community who know where it needs to go, and you trust them to send it wherever it needs to go. It's discretionary funds. So flow funding is about empowering local leaders to allocate the resources based on the unique needs of their communities. What a flow fund does is it identifies people who are embedded in a local community and gives them money and says, pass this money forward into your community in the ways that you think are the most needed and the most impactful. And then the donors of the Flow Fund get to feel good about the stories that come back from the impacts that are created by having philanthropy work based on trust, local and embedded expertise, and the flow of funding based on that trust into local communities. So for example, let's say that Kinship Earth gives $20,000 to someone that lives in Seattle, and that person in Seattle says, well, I have been given this $20,000 to pass it to whoever needs it most in my context for the regenerative work we're doing. And Kinship Earth does not require reporting. They don't tell you how to spend the money. All they do is identify these flow funders, these people who pass the money forward based on trust. And this is something that could be done in every bioregion, and Kinship Earth wants to help that happen. Then you look at the BioFi project. The BioFi project that launched earlier this year with a book that was identifying some of the key structures for how to build what they call bioregional financing facilities, which in a way you could say is like a specific incarnation of a set of processes and structures for this kind of work. And they've got a community of practice, and they're working with people who are organizing bioregionally. They're working with people who are not organizing bioregionally, but they're helping them to understand more what it means. And so they are a network that only partially overlaps with our network, but doesn't completely, which means there's a huge amount of potential for collaboration, for synergy, and for learning exchanges within this larger story of a fund for regenerating the Earth. And then there's the design school, where Penny and I made the decision to give $125,000 from the budget we have at the design school to add to the Earth Regeneration Fund. And the way that we did this was we went to the representatives of the 5 bioregions, and initially we told them that there were only 4 bioregions when we envisioned this idea a few months ago. So we said we were going to give $30,000 to each of those 4 bioregions. But at our gathering 2 weeks ago, we offered them the opportunity to allocate the money as a practice in building trust. Would they like to allocate the money differently? And they agreed that the Ogallala Aquifer, which wasn't part of the thinking 3 months ago, but had arrived to the event 2 weeks ago, that everyone should give part of the money being allocated to them to the Ogallala. And so we ended up deciding to increase from $120,000, which is divided by 4, $30,000 each into 4 bioregions, and instead moved to $125,000 divided into 5, which is that we give $25,000 to each of the 5 bioregions to support them in any way. Notice this is a flow fund. We trust the bioregional organizers to use the money any way they see fit to build their capacities for creating a funding ecosystem in their own bioregion. And this is the seed money for the Earth Regeneration Fund. But it just so happened the week before this gathering that took place in Toronto that we were invited into another process, which is the Gitcoin round for the BioFi Pathfinders. So this is something that will become more public in about a week. We started inviting the bioregional participants this week. So this is happening right now. And it's a collaboration between 4 different groups. The BioFi Project, the Regen Coordination Group, which is a network of regenerative finance and Web3 communities, the Design School for Regenerating Earth, and a group called Open Civics that develops open source tools for governance around bioregional frameworks. And between our 4 groups, we were able to find people who would donate money into a $55,000 matching pool. Oops, I said Bitcoin, that should say Gitcoin. That's a typo, a Gitcoin matching pool, because Gitcoin is a platform that allows people to raise money and then receive part of a matching pool based on the support that they receive. It's basically a way of using software to help allocate money to projects based on the way that people raise money for those projects. So what we are doing is allocating $55,000 from a matching pool, which included $5,000 from the design school, $5,000 from the BioFi project, and then funding from other people who put money into this pool. And that money is going to go to a cohort of 14 bioregional organizing teams. So what we did is between our 4 different groups, we identified 14 bioregional teams that are organizing bioregionally, and we want them to learn from each other. And while they're learning from each other, to receive some funding while they're doing it. And so this matching round, which officially opens on October 23rd, is going to be, so in about 2 weeks, is a 2-week period where you could donate money to any of these 14 bioregions, and they will receive additional money from this $55,000 matching pool. And you can see that even though this Gitcoin round is not named as part of the Earth Regeneration Fund, you can see it's part of the story because the story allows for it. The story allows for it to be coherent with the logic of the story. And so these are some examples of how the Earth Regeneration Fund is already starting. And then, of course, about 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago now, we launched the Bioregional Earth website, where we tell the story of living into a bioregional Earth. Notice how it's a gathering place for Earth regenerators to follow a design pathway for regenerating our planet with cultural, learning, and financial systems. So the Earth Regeneration Fund is part of the story of how we organize ourselves bioregionally all over the planet. And that this is the bigger story that the Earth Regeneration Fund sits within. And so I want to just share a little bit about how we see this Earth Regeneration Fund taking form within the design school. And I want to be really clear that it's taking form in other places as well, but we have a specific role to play within the design school, which is what I'm going to focus on now. For starters, we already have spaces that exist in the design school, like the Regenerative Finance Lab that we're in right now, the Bioregional Leaders Guild that starts next Tuesday, and the Bioregional Updates that'll start next Thursday. Bioregional updates are places where bioregional groups come together in the design school and just update each other on what's going on. It's a space of mutual learning between bioregions. The Regenerative Finance Lab is a place where we're going to practice building bioregional funding ecosystems in real-world contexts here in the design school. And the Bioregional Leaders Guild is a gathering place for learning how to be a leader at the bioregional scale and to support each other as a community of practice. All of you as members of the design school can join any of these sessions as members of the design school. So if you haven't signed up, go and find them in the event section of the school and come and join them. But then we also have spaces that are focused activities for the Earth Regeneration Fund. One is that the representatives of that gathering 2 weeks ago have already formed an ER Fund group, and we're going to host monthly meetings where we talk with each other about how we build the story of the Earth Regeneration Fund and how we mobilize resources into it to bring those resources into our bioregions. Then also we're going to have design immersions. Design immersions are when local bioregional organizers invite people into their landscape to have an immersion as they're building these funding ecosystems and these collaboration frameworks. And so in the future, all of you as members of the design school will be invited to in-person immersions in the different bioregions. Or if you're helping to organize your bioregion, you could offer a design immersion and invite other people to come to yours. So part of how we're going to learn to build this story and exchange with each other is to create physical context for in-person gatherings throughout the next year within our different bioregions. And then we're going to start to bring in other bioregions. It was really interesting synchronicity that while we were in the Toronto area having this gathering, that we saw something starting to happen in Europe, where there were several bioregional groups that were forming. And then Pete Jeffs wrote this post in the design school about how maybe they were creating 2 Atlantic Coast bioregional groups and not just one. And maybe they should learn how they should coordinate with each other. And maybe they should talk with the Mediterranean group. And it was clear that something was happening in Europe. So Penny and I have already reached out to those different organizers and are scheduling a meeting to talk to them about how do we bring other bioregions into this conversation in addition to the ones that were with us in person 2 weeks ago. And by the way, this branches out to other groups that are not in the design school, because a lot of those groups in Europe are connected with bioregional weaving labs. Bioregional Weaving Labs is a collaboration of Ashoka and Common Land Foundation, and they've been organizing bioregionally across Europe. But they're not part of the design school, and they don't need to be. But these organizers are organizing bioregionally, so they will build coherence with those other networks through these kinds of processes. And what we want to do is weave the narrative of the Earth Regeneration Fund across all of our bioregions, to talk about how we're mobilizing resources within them and between them, to build budgets and agendas that each of the bioregions could say, we're looking for this much money to do these things. Can anyone find funders or investors who would help us to do that? So that we can attract funding to the bioregions and attract funding to the planetary network through the Earth Regeneration Fund itself. And so this is the work that we're setting out to do, is to live into this story and to make it real. And so as you can see, this way of thinking is bioregional organizers are the sovereign people. They don't ask governments, they don't ask rich people, they don't ask multinational corporations. And they form relationships directly with others who want to live the same story and mobilize those resources into their landscapes. And by doing this, they're creating the logic of a different kind of economic system. So that's what the Earth Regeneration Fund is and how we see it coming into being. And we feel like if we do a good job at living into this story, all of our friends and allies who are not part of it now will discover that they can be, or maybe that they already were. Because it's not about having one story to then have like the fiefdom of the story. It's to have the one story that shows the structure and the geometry of how money needs to flow across a planetary network of bioregions, so that we eventually have a globalized economy that's organized bioregionally, which would be the planetary scale narrative of finance. So that's it. Would love to answer any questions, hear any thoughts, reactions. Just raise your hand.
Also, anybody who was there in the GTB, if you want to just share about your experience and your thoughts coming out of that time together as well. Like I see Brian and can't see everybody on the screen, but
yeah, maybe first anyone who was present at the gathering who would like to share. So I don't know, is it just Brian? I know that the
Brandon, there's Brandon.
And Brandon's here. I know the Forest of the Northeast group has an important gathering they're at today, so they couldn't be here with us.
Mm-hmm.
Brian, do you want to share something?
Yeah, thanks so much, Joe. And I'm really sorry to hear that you've got not feeling well again. The gathering in the GTV was really powerful, and the brilliance of your storytelling and creating the global narrative is really important to everything that's happening. The weaving together of the different bioregions around the world, learning from and with each other as we all move forward is going to be really important. This is really complex, difficult work because you're building relationships on the ground, you're building relationships across bioregions and around the world. And there's really a lot, very different contexts between all the bioregions. The ones that visited with us here in the GTB and participated in the Regenerative Finance Lab, the context is so different in each of the bioregions that it's really helpful to learn about how each of us is approaching it. And I've really found it valuable to build in-person relationships with all the other bioregions that came, and really appreciated how you and Penny were facilitating the entire process while they were here. In the GTB, we gave all the participants a flavor for the GTB by hosting events at different parts of the GTB, from urban downtown to rural farm. So that was really important to us to give people a real flavor for the landscape here in the GTB. The Regenerative Finance Lab on the Friday was really a really powerful moment, because we brought together funders in the GTB with local project people. So we had land trusts, we had conservation authorities, we had people doing backyard tree planting work, regenerative farms, a wide variety of projects. So, and having a Novel Foundation, Martin Kirk present their philosophy to funding and why bioregional funding is really important. Having the Toronto Foundation present as well, and connecting the local with the international was really powerful. And we gave space for Susan Bosak to share about the local work, for Joe to share about the global connections, and space for 9 different people from local projects to speak as well. And that was really powerful, particularly ending with the student eco leader, the high school student who organized the eco market last year, and her thoughts on how she was seeing the world, how she was seeing her future, and how important it was to participate in the bioregion and to move the regeneration work forward, and how that really changed her life. It was a really powerful day, and really appreciated everyone coming out and sharing that with us. So I think that's the quick overview, and we're happy to answer any questions if anyone has any as well.
Thank you for that, Brian. And I see Brandon's here, so we'll let Brandon come in next.
Yeah, I'll just jump in to say, firstly, I think, yeah, thank you so much to Brian and Susan, and then Joe and Penny for all of the work that they put in to host that week. It was a tremendous amount of work. And in fact, I think Brian and Susan were off and away organizing the big forum that they were organizing on bioregional finance that Friday. So just really appreciative, though, of the structure and layout of the week was really incredible. And I think one of the things that they did is that they presented a really kind of like the first attempt, I think, to really actually shift the conversation to trust-based philanthropy, bioregional finance, and then seeding this idea of an Earth Regeneration Fund. And it really felt like something which is a great example and a model which could be replicated in other areas. And I'm sure it'll be locally adapted and other things, but it was just, I think, a great first window into that. And just to say that for me, I really appreciated, we had an opportunity with all of the bioregional organizing teams from the Great Lakes, from Barichara, the Northern Andes, the Ogallala, the Forests of the Northeast, the GTB, and Cascadia, to really spend that week in the run-up just getting to meet each other, talk about our strategies, learn from each other. And I think that there's a lot of energy and excitement for also continuing these conversations in both the design school and elsewhere. But just as learning spaces, as peer-run learning spaces where we're learning from each other, we're all, no one's actually done this yet. But it is great to have all of these other people that we get to work with to try to make these things a reality. And there's a lot of excitement. I think it was great to have Tyler and Sydney there from, the Kinship Earth Flow Fund with BioFi. And so there really is a feeling right now that we're doing this together, and we are creating like a coordinated plan and strategy. And then what I'll just say about the Friday event that I thought was very impressive is Brian and Susan and Joe and Penny, I feel like, really coordinated and orchestrated a really wonderful event that it was basically a morning of presentations and then a really nice luncheon. But they were able to use the NOVO Foundation and all of these names and bioregional organizers to almost leverage to help get the Toronto Foundation in the room. And by doing that, they were able to build the legitimacy, which got a lot of other people in the room. And then Joe was able to give this presentation. I also want to say that Dan Longboat, who's a professor, gave a beautiful presentations on the importance of bioregionalism and the two-way kind of path of indigenous knowledge and Western science, of kind of bringing those things together, that I thought was really powerful. And then everybody just really was able to hammer the importance of place-based organizing, bioregionalism, Earth Regeneration Funds. And I think it really was able to present a really nice model. And then something that they were able to do very effectively was put us all at different tables with these funders, with the regenerative, farms, with the conservation districts. And it almost created a tipping point in consciousness of like where people were actually really leaning into the idea of trust-based philanthropy. You had people from Tides Foundation and all of these other like really big players, all in the room at the table, hearing about the importance of place-based organizing and trust-based philanthropy, and like the importance of this flow funding and shifting these models where we're actually valuing that, yeah, the funding is going and to where people on the ground are saying it's important, not that funders are saying it's important. And so I just really appreciate it, and those are some of my takeaways and learning. And I'm very inspired to try to figure out how we can be working here with the communities in Cascadia to organize similar events too. And excited to see that there's other people in other bioregions doing the same.
Thank you, Brandon. Yeah, it was super powerful. And I'd just love to open it up now for questions or comments from anyone. Just raise your hand and come on in.
Yeah, I forgot to mention, Joe, we are working on editing the recording from the Friday forum. So we were hoping to have something ready next week that we can share with the whole design school. So that will give you a real in-person flavor for what it was all about and how powerful the day was, and perhaps a model for other bioregions to follow in the future.
Thank you, Brian. Brian and Susan do a great job of setting up an event and bringing in a great media team and being sure we get lots of recorded materials afterwards. So heck yeah, more of that. Claire, welcome.
So yay, thank you all for all that inspiration. And I'm organizing an event for next month that Brandon's coming down for in the South Willamette Valley in Cascadia to just introduce new ideas like this to the projects in the community. But one question I have is there's another parallel movement about local economies and cooperative development and the kind of endogenous economies for a community. And I'm wondering how, and so what you've presented is all focused on bringing in outside resources to the community, which, that is so needed, fantastic. In terms of long-term sustainability and understanding our relationship with the locality and the carrying capacity and everything else, I'm wondering how you see building local economies fits in with this frame.
Oh, that's such a beautiful question, Claire. First, I would say that they fit together like this, that they really fit beautifully together. What the local economies, or even like local living economies, those, there are these ideas that go back decades now. What they often have not had was a planetary rallying cry in the midst of an extreme and intensifying planetary crisis, which is to say they have been laying the groundwork quietly in basically every local place on Earth. And what we need is a unifying narrative. And so I see it in one sense as being like unifying narratives for the planetary scale for what's going on now. But that would weave with all of that existing work. And then also I would add that one of the things that we work with a lot here in Columbia, and that is a major theme of how the Earth Regeneration Fund will work, is to build on the idea or the perspective of community philanthropy. Community philanthropy is, first of all, philanthropy literally translates as love for humans. It's like love for each other, if you want to see it that way. Philanthropy is not rich people giving money, it's people giving love to each other. It's acting in service out of love. That's what philanthropy really means. Community philanthropy is acting in service to your community out of love, which means community philanthropy is about exactly what you're talking about. So community foundations are supposed to be based on community philanthropy, and I say it that way because some are better than others. But the idea is that they're supposed to be helping mobilize resources within the community among members of the community to build these local economic dynamics. And so I see that as absolutely essential, basically. It's like we need to build those capacities, but sometimes to get started, we just opportunistically find the resources to get things going come from outside. Like, oh, we need an organizing team to be funded, but we can't seem to get that funded locally. But we found this foundation that's way over there and they paid for it for the first year. But as we're doing this, we built the local relationships and later we mobilized those resources. And so I see it as being that sort of, that's why I did that hand gesture. It's like they really become interwoven and should be. And I would also say that the future, post-fossil fuel future, is relocalization. There's nothing new about saying that, right? I mean, you've been part of that movement for a while yourself. And one of the things that I can name briefly now, and we'll talk more about later, is that Penny and I were invited to be co-organizers of the Global Earth Repair Conference in Port Townsend. That's going to take place next year in May, which is a gathering of the kind of ecosystem restoration, permaculture, kinds of communities all over the world, organizing around a planetary agenda of restoring the health of the planet's climate. And so what happens when you take that kind of a lens is that all of the solutions are necessarily local. It's things like go out in your backyard and pull the invasive weeds, or plant a pollinator garden, or stack rocks so that water flows differently in a stream bed. It's all stuff that must be done locally. And so, which is how we do regeneration too. Regenerative work is done locally. So, so I think that what you're naming here is like 90% of what we'll be doing is what you're bringing in, even if it's nudged into being by funding coming from different places. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Claire. And now other Claire, gosh, hi, Claire. Over to you, Claire.
I just wanted to build on that, on what you brought up, Claire, because yeah, you always ask those questions and it's fantastic. And just to say how much I'm realizing, like, as we're getting, it's always in the details that you start to actually know what you're dealing with, but that none of the local organizing, while it's happening, building the funding ecosystem at the local level has to happen. And I love what's happening with the coordination at these higher scales are doing to help bootstrap what actually couldn't happen before, to sort of have some guiding pathways and sort of you know, I don't believe that any of these foundations, I mean, I know what you've spoken to about where some of the money's coming from, but I do believe that people genuinely want to make a difference. I just think that the models that they're operating in, they just haven't had the kind of vision and inspiration that this is providing. And so providing that and inspiring it and showing how powerful it is in terms of how we can work when we're coordinating, can be, you know, actually towards the regeneration of an area. So I just wanted to say that that is coming in a very, very big way to what we're thinking about with Regenerate Cascadia. And also maybe also to put in that while we're putting our critical paths together and the timelines, it's quite hard to know exactly where to put the funding ecosystem in. As far, it's kind of like when the time is right is when those, like, people need to be having enough of those conversations. It's like that's where, so we've got a kind of vague area of where those sessions can happen at a local area. But just to say, there's a kind of iterating and learning and actually taking the feedback that's happening to it needs to be built alongside all of the other work so that it's part of a larger conversation. So but anyway, thank you. This is fantastic.
Yeah, thank you for that, Claire. And before we go over to Pat, I'll just name that one thing that Brian and Susan do really well when they bring us in is we come in with a larger story, and the larger story helps change the mindset. And that's definitely been part of the process. And me being an outsider and being able to stand down there and speak, I'm actually politically free to say things in a way that locals sometimes can't, or at least it's harder to. And so there is a role of that outside voice. And so it's just naming that, leveraging the story to a higher level with whatever means we can, is part of how this works. So I just want to name that part in and then pass it over to you, Pat.
Okay. I'll mute myself. Okay. You can hear me, right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Well, I always carry with me a certain level of frustration because I can't articulate what I'm always hearing and learning from these sessions. And so I use these sessions as vehicles as to share with people locally. What you use the term relocalization, and that's kind of where I am. Always, I'm working locally with people, organizations in my watershed. I don't even know if maybe I'm stuck here and I need to get larger into a bioregion. But this new session we're having this morning is even a better tool than the last sessions we had, you know, in the building the Bioregional Learning Center. You know, the last webinar and the last those recordings that I've been using to spread the word. Getting funding is something that always is on people's minds here. So I'm looking forward to the upcoming sessions on how to be a leader, because right now I'm looking at these videos. The recording of this session is even a bigger window, which I'm hoping that if I pass this around, that people will see a little bit more about what regenerating the earth is all about. So anyway, I just want to say that these are really helpful to participate and then be able to pass on this recording to people I think ought to hear it. So thank you.
Thank you, Pat. And just so you know, this recording will be made public, so anyone can share this video recording. And what I think is beautiful about the storytelling we're doing now, where we're practicing the storytelling, is that the story of what's happening in your watershed is part of the story. And if you're coming upon challenges or opportunities, your story could directly help Brian and Susan in the GTB by them being able to draw attention to your story to the right person, and vice versa. So just to say, those kinds of synergies come about when we share our stories. Sharing stories is a big deal. It's not a little deal, it's a big deal. So I just wanted to name that. And I'm also excited about the Bioregional Leaders Guild together. That's going to be a lot of fun.
Also, just to add also, you know, how we posted your writing recently in the school, Pat. Even sharing how we're sharing our stories helps each other, because just to know how is Pat telling his story, and then it inspires me to how to tell my story, or different ways that I could tell the story here. So, yeah.
Thanks.
So just keep it up. That's all.
Yeah.
You're doing great. Brian, over to you.
Yes, thanks, Joe. Yeah, I just wanted to play off what you were saying in the previous person, Joe. The importance of relationship building and the importance of the story. And I really like looking at the bioregional funding ecosystem as a set of relationships. The work that you do in a bioregion is it's very much emergent work, careful, patient relationship building. And the work here, we were inspired by the work that you and Penny were doing in Bioregion originally. So 3 years ago, started participating in the work that you were doing in Bioregion through the webinars, and the learning along the way from what you've been doing in that area has been really pivotal to moving this forward. And then having you and Penny in for the activation here 2 years ago, as you said earlier, it's really important for people to understand the larger story. And so when we brought you in originally, we had set up presentations for the Conservation Authority, so a different presentation for them, municipalities, for regenerative agriculture folks, for students, for the public. So all of these different audiences, you were able to reach them with versions of the story that spoke to them. And that was really the genesis of getting people excited about the bigger story of regenerating the earth and the part that we could play in the GTB in our bioregion in that larger story. And then again, it's a careful emergent process of building relationships. So from that initial presentation to the conservation authorities, we started reaching out and building relationships with individuals, inviting them to present at other events. And then the Bioregional Earth Summit really crystallized a lot of relationships. The regenerative farms, the first time you came in, before the event, we assembled around the kitchen table at Heartwood Farm and Cidery, and relationships formed around that kitchen table, and they've carried through to today. And then if you look at the Toronto Foundation, the fact that they came and gave they were co-hosting the Bioregional Regeneration Forum this past Friday. Again, that was a careful process of relationship building over time. Didn't happen overnight. when you and Penny came in the second time, we did strategic meetings with groups, and one of them was we went downtown to Toronto to visit with the Toronto Foundation, and we weren't there to ask for anything. We were there to talk about what we were doing, talk about the work in South America, talk about the emerging community foundations in Colombia that were forming, and the fact that they were doing both social and ecological regeneration. So they were a new type of community foundation. So, and that led eventually to them presenting at the forum this past Friday. So, and the forum itself was instrumental to get other funders on board in the GTB to get them to understand what this is all about, because they're used to funding narrow, siloed things, and getting them to think bigger, getting them to think about the complexity of the poly crisis that we're facing, and the fact that we need to do something different. And the bigger story really speaks to a lot of people. So I just wanted to just emphasize those different aspects of relationship building over time, and the fact that this is very emergent work, and it requires careful, strategic relationship building over time.
Here. Thank you, Brian. That I lived that story with you, so I know what you're talking about. It's very, very important what you've been holding. And now I'm going to pass it over to Joan.
I was at the Friday session, and I was thrilled to be there with a couple of other people from the Grand River watershed hub of the Greater Toronto bioregion, Barbara and Marilyn. And so something that struck me, I just like to think of analogies, and I feel like what's going on, flow is such an important word, that there's gradual forming of a larger and larger river. That some people are kind of in a tiny little stream, and some people are maybe in a little whirlpool. Keep the stream yet, but some people are, and there's fish moving between, and you know, this weaving is just so exciting. It was absolutely amazing to be part of that that day. It felt like it just went past in the blink of an eye, but it was so great to meet people in person and have everybody there be excited and energized and on board. And you know, I just felt like I just didn't get to talk to everybody I would have liked to talk to, so that you can see the possibilities and the hope. And it was just fabulous to be a part of, even just kind of on the periphery. Thank you.
I just wanted to say how beautiful that metaphor is,
Perfect.
and how that kind of metaphor is what we need to be thinking. If you think of the Earth Regeneration Fund like a river, then you're saying, well, we have these stories that merge. It's the stories that merge. And the stories merge through our relationships, just like how you were able to be there on Friday with us and our stories merged. So thanks so much for that, Joan. It's just beautiful. And then Karen, over to you.
Hi, thank you. I want to just talk about a project that I've been organizing. We just sort of jumped in and decided, okay, we're going to do Regenerate MKE. And we're having an activity October 20th where I've created like a little passports that have the permaculture principles, and people are collecting stories from these different agencies who are showing up at my street fair. So it's a nerd fest. People are like, how is this fun? And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like a science fair where we can collect stories. Don't you get it? You know, so I'm jumping in with both feet and learning it along the way. But I've got someone from the Eco Office, City of Milwaukee, who's prepared to tell a permaculture story about food waste reduction and composting. And the plastic-free Milwaukee, and yes, and the passports. My sister did. This is from the park system, like in this Wisconsin state parks have a passport, and national parks, of course, have a passport. And anyway, this is our mechanism for collecting stories next Sunday, and a story. And I've been developing my storytelling skills, and a longer form story I'm working on is called Discarding the Single-Use Story, because that's the story of, using something once is something that wasn't always true in my lifetime. And I want to figure out a way for us to discard that, because I think that allows us to treat human beings in a single-use kind of relationality. And I want to get past that single-use kind of relationality, discarding that story. Anyway, thank you. I love this work.
Oh, just adding a reference to the movie Fight Club, where he has the single serving friend that you sit next to on the airplane. Anyway, that's, I just want to name, because I've spent time in Wisconsin and I know how beautiful it is, that every place is special and every place is a center of action, is not a center of action. And what we need is many, many centers of action. And then we need coherence through story. Story makes it coherent. So yeah, sounds like you're gonna have a great time, Karen. I wish I could be there. And then over to you, Pete.
Am I unmuted? Yeah. So yeah, thank you. I just wanted to say, I mean, like on our last little Western Atlantic group, we were able to invite Corinne and Peter, who have been doing their bioregional work in the North Sea. They've created that work and they are carrying that. And it was through Annalika that we met via LinkedIn. And so it was just like a huge pleasure to be able to invite them into our meeting with the design school. I know that Peter has joined us now, which is really cool. It was just like meeting cousins. And there was the sense that, we've been holding this space and they've been holding that space. And then like we just came together in that meeting, and it was just something that was really, for me, it was just like amazing. It was such a beautiful moment. So I just wanted to share my emotion for that. It's been so beautiful, and yeah, I love it.
It's really been beautiful to watch you, Pete, as you've just like blossomed in this in the last few months. It's just been so wonderful. Well, if there are any more comments or questions, please bring them in. But in the meantime, I can start winding us down. I just wanted to name some of the ways that this story can be made more concrete. And I'll tell a story of what happened for me when Penny and I went to Amarillo, Texas to spend time with Will Masters. And Will said, we're going to go out to the ranch. And me, not being from West Texas, I had no idea what a ranch means in the Panhandle. Because a ranch is basically the oil barons, like the fossil fuel kings and queens, have these massive tracts of land where a ranch is like 50,000 acres of land or something. They're basically like national parks. So the ranch was like a national park. So I had no idea what it was, what it really was. And so we went on safari at the ranch. Like literally we took this dune buggy thing and drove for an hour, and we weren't at the other end of the ranch yet. It was that big. And Will, of course, had intimate knowledge of all these ecosystem things that were going on and stream restorations he was doing. And it was like so, so cool. And then there was a point during that trip where I realized that if someone could buy that ranch, which was owned by a shareholder company of rich people who just get passive income from it, that could be turned into a national park size of an ecology center or a regenerative learning site. So I just asked him, how much would it cost to buy this ranch? And he said, about $30 million. Like $30 million, this ranch is huge. I mean, that's actually not an unreasonable number. And I started feeling into what it would mean to raise it quickly became $100 million idea. What would it take to raise, what would it mean to tell a story to raise $100 million to work on restoring the Ogallala Aquifer? Now, if you don't know what the Ogallala Aquifer is It's got as much water in it as the Great Lakes, but it's underground. And it is the largest groundwater system on Earth, and it provides the water for agriculture that feeds 2 billion people. And it's going to run out of water in the next 30 or 40 years. And some places have already run out. And so to think of the Ogallala as something that's worth $100 million investment is not a hard sell. It's actually a pretty easy sell because it's of planetary strategic significance. So when I started feeling into a story like that, like, oh, we could tell a story to raise $100 million for regenerating the Ogallala. But wait, what if we tell a story for $100 million to regenerate some of the marine ecosystems of the Salish Sea? Or what if, and I started seeing that these stories can support each other, that the Earth Regeneration Fund becomes a collection of stories like this. Like you put money into the Earth Regeneration Fund, some of it's going to go to the Ogallala, some of it's going to go to the Salish Sea, some of it's going to go to the biodiversity corridors of the Northern Andes. And you start to see that this is a story of stories that's super powerful. And this idea of creating a budget, like what would we do with $100 million to restore the Ogallala? And it turns out you can spend $100 million pretty quick. What I mean by that is it's not hard to create the budget. But the budget is a story. And there are plenty of rich people in Texas. And so like, oh, maybe we'd find the money in Texas. But it's just this way of building a story grounded to the transformative potential of a place. And that when you have multiple places and you tell multiple stories, then you really can mobilize resources in a significant way. So I just want to name that as sort of, making it a little more concrete. The Earth Regeneration Fund is we're going to invite the different bioregions to create budgets, which is basically a collective purpose. We have a collective purpose, and this is what we need to do it. And then we tell a story about the Earth Regeneration Fund that tells their stories too, so that they don't have to tell their story to only the people they know. Their story is being told to people they don't know who might actually be the ones who support them. So that's just another very practical and strategic element of this. And then Marie, please, welcome.
Mute myself. Right. I've been, it's going to be a bit of a spanner in the works for me, but I've been feeling a sense of unease. I've got to talk about these things. The unease is this: as soon as you have a part of the school, a group meeting, well, I don't know if other people feel it, but I think they feel, oh, but I wasn't there. And that creates a differentiation. The other thing is that you talked a lot about philanthropy. So I was part of the creation, the story of the Institute of Ecotechnics created the Biosphere 2. It was very, very much based on one massive philanthropy from Ed Bass, a Texas panhandle billionaire that we just talked about. Now, eventually, the culture he came from created such a takeover that the Biosphere 2 was destroyed as a biosphere. It doesn't function as one. So I am basically thinking of this. There is a big difference between bringing money in from philanthropy, so people who for some reason have extra money, which basically belongs to that system, or was created by that system that you just described at the beginning, and local economies, and permaculture, anything like that, was to do with generating wealth from where you are. And it's always going to be small amounts. And small amounts can go a long way. So I have a little bit of unease about the idea of bringing large amounts of money and then distributing them. Now, who decides who is going to have it? So I just wanted to talk about that because all that brings out the notion of power and how a school like the design school is organized in terms of decision making and power. As you are growing, because what you have now is a group that are Americans. This is America. There is a European group. I've just took part in one session of them, and our way of meeting was very different from this way of meeting. That really strikes me. So I just want to know that as it expands, the school work, is there any notion about looking into that power structure? Who decides? Who leads? Is the leadership structure going to change? That sort of thing. Sorry if I was spanner in the works, but I wanted to bring that up.
Thank you so much for bringing it up. As your experience with Biosphere 2 makes evident, it's extremely important because you can destroy something beautiful with abuse of power. One of the things that we started planting in the relational field when we were together in Toronto was that we can see the ways that we support each other and start to create mutual exchange. So there was immediately like Brandon talking with Will, like, oh, well, I'd love to come and help you with that. And I'd like to bring what we're doing to you. And there's this way of relating. And what that starts to do is open up a space where if a larger amount of money, and in this case, I'd say like $100,000 or more, so not like millions, but just something fairly sizable, was to come into the Earth Regeneration Fund. What we would want to do is start to have participatory processes where representatives of the bioregions set agendas and strategies for the money and how it should be allocated, which helps to begin to make that a community-oriented process. But what it doesn't do is the other part that you named, just how do we bring other bioregions in? Because there can be this sort of inside and outside dynamic. And Penny and I were feeling it at the time that we saw what was happening in the European groups. Like, oh, we've got to bring the European groups into this in a fluid way. We shouldn't rush it, but we also shouldn't delay. It's like, you don't do it too quickly and do it wrong, but we need to do it and we need to do it thoughtfully. And we're just beginning to build culture so that even the group that came together in Toronto, they were only together for 5 or 6 days. So really there was some culture building, but what we need is culture building over the span of 2 or 3 years. And so what I see happening now is things like that Gitcoin round, where the Gitcoin round has got 14 bioregions involved. And some of the bioregions that are in the group that were in Toronto are part of that, but there are others who aren't. Basically, what I'm saying is at the larger level of the field, some of this coherence is starting to emerge. And what we need to do is build that larger coherence into the Earth Regeneration Fund at the same time. That as the larger coherence is happening, we need to bring that larger coherence together with the Earth Regeneration Fund. Because if we don't, it could easily become, well, the Earth Regeneration Fund, that's what like Joe and his friends are doing, but that's not us. Something like that, which would be a big shame if it became something like that. It would really fail to meet any of its potential. So this work on power, Penny and I have a lot of experience with this in the other way, the surprising way that power often plays out. And Marie, this connects so much with your work on body-based work, which is that most people, their power is actually expressed through trauma triggers and not through sovereignty in themselves. So cultivating the psychological capacity to work with money and to work with energy more generally is a big part of this. I would just say it that way, as a placeholder for a much larger series of conversations. Because we've watched as you try to give someone money and they sort of freak out with their trauma from money, that there's no sovereignty in those moments. And so building sovereignty in that specifically physiological body-based way, I think is fundamental. I feel to add anything on that or not.
Yeah, we're definitely going to be working with with that part, and some other underlying inquiries that are, part of what you're naming, the power dynamics, how do we cultivate our own sovereignty and our integrity and all of this. So yeah, it's these are not small questions that you're bringing forward. They're very important.
And yes, they are on our radar, and because you are feeling the tension in it, it's in the field, which means
Yeah.
we'll be addressing it together. Thank you, Marie. I'll pass it over to Claire. Something hopefully fairly quick so we can wrap up, but then we'll wrap up. Claire, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say again, I think there's a reason why I think in the early stages at the grassroots, going a little more slowly, because we are completely recreating governance. Like none of this stuff can happen out of a way of looking at complexity, exactly what you were talking to, Joe. But there's something about going slowly enough so that the trust is being built and it's actually on a foundation where where those new governance structures at a minimum viable process can start to take hold, because we can't you can't do everything at once, but it does have to have the right DNA of the entire system. So I really appreciate what you brought up, Marie, because I just think, yeah, of course, we do not want to recreate what it's so easy to charge ahead to do the thing, but it's the culture that really needs to shift. So I just love this conversation, and thanks. You speak so well to it, Joe.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, so what I want to say now is that, and Penny actually mentioned this while we're at that gathering on the GTB Regenerative Finance Summit. Afterwards, Penny said, Joe, you do this bold thing where you stand in front of a big group of people and declare something real. I'm like, and right now the Earth Regeneration Fund is born. There, take that. And she was sort of laughing at how I do that. And I just said, well, sometimes we just need to take our sovereignty to do stuff. Like we can declare this thing exists, and then we do it, and we just do it. I'm a farm kid from Missouri. I don't ask permission. I just do it. And so there's something about all of us doing that that's really important. And what I hope we can do with the Earth Regeneration Fund is live into this story together to support what we're all trying to do, because everyone here has something in your heart that you're trying to give to the world that extractive financial system is trying to kill. Like, it does not want you to. And you can feel that, you can feel that energy, that antagonism. But when you look at actual human beings, real people, we do want to see each other fulfill our dreams. We do want to see beautiful things happen. Sometimes we simply want to witness someone creating beautiful art. And so, I mean, look at how much money we spend on art, let alone all the other ways art is valued. That doing something beautiful nourishes our soul. And so what I hope we can do is build this capacity. And we're already practicing flow funding, like I said, with that $125,000. We're practicing flow funding in some other ways at a smaller scale. I've been doing flow funding for 5 years in Barichara. I tell stories, mobilize money, and pass it to the people in Barichara. And they do beautiful things, and I feel great about the beautiful things they do, and they feel great to be doing them. And so this idea of flow funding, I think, is really powerful for all of us, because we all have value that we can flow to each other. We all have ways to support each other. And we do that on calls like this. But as we start to do immersions, we'll do them in our own communities and landscapes. And that's just going to be incredible. So maybe that's where we stop, is to hold that energy of flowing the value into our communities and landscapes. Oh my gosh, that just sounds awesome. So thank you everyone for being here today. I'll get the recording up online later today, and you can share this recording with anyone you like. Invite them into the design school, or just invite them into the story. And let's all play together. So thank you everyone. Gracias a todos. And we'll talk to you all soon.